Hello and welcome. This is the BCS panel debate, the challenge of security capability now and into the future. It's particularly pertinent for us. We are BCS, Chartered Institute for IT. We really concern ourselves with two things. One is about good and best practice, which is doing today's stuff really well, learning from the mistakes of others, implementing standards, using lessons learned to be able to do things that we need to do today and do them to the best of our ability. We're also about next practice. What's coming? What's going to help us give competitive advantage to enterprises, but also make sure that we are realizing both the opportunity and the threat, especially in this environment, especially within cybersecurity, information assurance, and information security. So we do that in a manner of ways. We do debates like this, but we have qualifications and certifications, and in this space, of course, do the CSG certified professional, but many more other things to try and help people understand these two particular issues. Doing today's stuff well and doing tomorrow's stuff first. I think we'll hear that one of the difficult things as people understand that they are a digital enterprise, and I can't think of a single organisation that isn't on some sort of journey with regards to its digital realisation of itself, both public sector and private sector. If we're on this digital journey, what does that mean with regard to threat and impact, cyber, information security and assurance?
Thank you, Adam. I'm Henry Tucker. I'm the editor-in-chief of IT Now, the membership magazine for BCS. But I'm not the important one here. It's these three people to my right. So if I could start with Richard, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Richard Holmes. I work for CGI, a large IT services systems integration company. We've got about 70,000 people worldwide, of a bit over 5,000 in the UK, and I've got a role working in our cyber security unit as business engineering director, taking our cyber security capability out to all of the business units we have in the UK to make sure appropriate cyber security is built into the capabilities we take to our clients, both across public sector but more broadly into critical national infrastructure and commercial.
Good afternoon. I'm Gareth Niblet. I chair the Information Security Specialist Group of the BCS, which consists of about 4,500 security practitioners. Separately, I consult on security, privacy and compliance issues in the public and private sector. And prior to that, I was Chief Information Security Officer of a telecommunications group, obviously part of critical national infrastructure.
Good afternoon. My name is Ponyville Malik. I work for BAE Systems, currently working in the naval sector as our head of capability for information assurance from a product point of view. So making sure the ships that we provide to our customers are secure for use in operations. I've also worked in other sectors within BAE, so the air sector and the submarine sector, so know a bit about that as well.
Okay. We will factor in questions from yourselves, but I've got a few just to get the panel warmed up. So just let me know in the usual manner when you have a question, and we'll try and fit you in. But just to kick us all off, Richard, if I can start with you. What, in your opinion, are the big security issues facing the UK as a whole?
I think the biggest challenge we face is predominantly around skills and awareness, not just at a technical level within organisations, because actually there are lots of good products out there and capabilities that can be built, but there is a challenge at the sort of management layer in organisations to have awareness of the threat, have understanding of it, have it articulated perhaps in the context of other risks and threats that they see, not just from a sort of IT perspective, and then the ability of organisations to articulate security requirements more as an enabler to some of the things that they want to do around digital as a channel, around mobility, for example, things that drive real benefit into organisations, and seeing security as an enabler for that, as opposed to a sort of cost line that, especially in the context of government procurement at the moment, where departments are under real hard budgetary constraints, where you want to minimise those costs as much as possible.
People. It's always about the people, isn't it? There's too many attackers. There's not enough defenders. We're here this morning. There's a skill shortage within UK sort of cyber industry, and we're trying to address it all the way from school children learning to code, all the way to post sort of graduate doctoral research into areas that may, in time, inform sort of the cybersecurity market as to how we might defend, the products, the services, and the technologies that might be brought to defend cyberspace in its widest. Technology can't defend things if the people aren't there to develop the processes and the policies that don't understand the threats. We're constantly defending against yesterday's threats. We heard this morning also about procurement. The cyber criminals can procure things faster than we can. I've just been through a government procurement exercise. I can assure you I could have delivered that much quicker had I not been constrained with the EU and UK government rules around procurement. If an attacker can buy something off a website and use the latest tools, why can't we use the latest tools to defend ourselves? Without the people, without the ability to then put in the policies, procedures and the technologies to defend ourselves, we're always going to be on the back foot, and we're always going to be relying on our people, the partnerships with other organisations through CISP, etc., the education and awareness that Cyber Essentials and also sort of massively online open communications learning courses that BIS have just launched, the qualifications that sort of BCS and other organisations bring to the fore. Without our people, we're going to be lost.
And I think in addition to that, there's a big aspect of supply chain that we haven't properly addressed yet. Understanding the risks that our supply chain bring to us, particularly when you're delivering a large product like a ship. So you're going to have lots of bits that break during service and you're going to have to repair them. It's understanding what the risks are that your supply chain bring to you as an organisation.
I think if you look even at the university figures since the 80s, there's been a massive drop-off on ICT learning. Software engineering, computer science, etc. haven't been sexy. Geeks are only sexy on t-shirts nowadays. It's changing, but it's changing slowly, and it will take time to trickle down into the workplace. So we've not just got to consider teaching the young, we've got to be considering teaching and retraining people now in the workplace. We can't just plug this gap in 10 years' time when people have completed their education. We have to be plugging it now. And I think giving the opportunity for, if there's such a shortage, well, surely then with such a latent demand, we shouldn't be trying to fulfill it with people that are available to us, that understand our business, and that with a modicum of retraining or made awareness of the cyber issues, IT people, management, etc., can be given sufficient awareness of cyber issues to actually address it in the wider business. Because not the people in IT or on the ground that are going to make the big changes, it's going to be the senior management. And that's where some of the education also needs to be happening. Because they hold the budget, they hold the risk.
I do a lot of work with schools at the moment, so trying to educate the school system that there is this opportunity and there is a career path in security. I don't think a lot of people are aware of that at quite young in their career. So we're starting to make it really clear that there is career progression and a way of developing in the security field. And it's been really helpful with schemes like CCP, so you can now start to see what type of competencies these sorts of people should be aspiring towards.
So I very much agree with that. CCP actually particularly I think is a great initiative, and we're certainly embracing that. I'd say there is a sort of capacity gap at the moment. Companies like ours are all, we're growing pretty much as fast as we can. We grew by about 20% last year, and that's really driven by getting people with the right skills. But it's not simply going to the market to get those skills. There's a need for organisations to invest in updating, because the environment's changing quite rapidly, and the threats and trends are changing. There's a need to invest in workforces on an ongoing basis to keep skills updated. So things like CCP are really good from that perspective.
But then that leads into the next challenge, especially in the public sector, is sort of retention and pay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The private sector can pay a hell of a lot more. I've had discussions. We're trying to build a security team within a central government department and grow it. and especially in some more advanced skills around sort of the analytical side, there's an understanding either you need to be able to offer that career progression internally or live with a very high churn rate and set your business up with one of those or both of those goals in mind and not get too cut up about it when you bring someone in, train them for 2 years and then they're gone.
In terms of, obviously, the issue of data and security is growing, and it's a concern for government, business and the individual. Where do you see that the responsibility lies for the security and data issues in those sort of three areas?
Shall I start? So my answer to that, I guess the obvious answer is all three. I think absolutely government needs to play its part. I think, as we've heard in some of the other talks this morning, there's no way that government can do it all. Absolutely not. I think for me, there's the international coordination angle, really important. Government can do. There's some sort of policy, helping create frameworks that allow, you know, us all, whether it be service providers or government organisations, to fit into a common framework and then work efficiently to develop cybersecurity, whether it be frameworks around skills or standards or you know, model architectures, or, you know, so there's streams of activities around that are really important.
If you don't mandate certain requirements of your supply chain to provide sufficient sort of availability, resilience, sufficient security to protect your assets in whatever environment you're deploying it in, be it cloud, virtualization, be it to building your own widget on your desk. Government needs to be an educated customer and suppliers need to be a trusted expert.
Following on from a couple of points you made there, Gareth, about the security requirements. Now, we talked about this earlier, about why aren't security requirements built in from the start? I mean, this is something we've been talking about for years and it's still not happening.
As a supplier, we try to do as much as we can, but you are at that constant battle of budget and everything else that's going on, and making sure it actually gives the customer the capability that they want. So it is really important that customers do request security as a requirement from the beginning. Because also, if you do it later down the line, as you're all aware, it can cost a hell of a lot more money and time to rectify later on. So you need to design it in from the beginning.
Start the engagement early. Well, you know, I think from our perspective, increasingly actually in public procurements, we do see more standard. I think things like codes of connection to things like the PSN have driven some consistency. But there is a shift at the moment, I think, to empower departments more to take a judgment on the basis of their data and their risk, what controls they need to put in place. That brings with it some challenges into departmental working, where if different departments take different judgments when they're passing data between them, there's some challenges around that. And in general terms, I think flexibility is good, actually. Empowering departments to give them flexibility is good, but that doesn't mean that the answer can be, well, well, in which case, because there's no mandatory book, that means we don't have to do it. I think that, you know, that isn't the intent, I believe, in the shift. It's making the appropriate judgment, and depending on what you're doing, actually, you might not have to put a great deal of in, but for some things, you really do, even at official, essentially.
I just wondered your thoughts now on, you know, the Internet of Things. It's at the top of Gartner's hype cycle. Obviously, you know, devices are connecting out, whether they're heat sensors or whatever. What's your take on that and the whole, well, obviously the sharing of data associated with it?
Internet of Things is broken before it started because people haven't mandated the security requirements up front. And the fixes that will come along, in part, initially, will be bolt-ons. They'll cocoon the Internet of Things within certain environments because independently they can't protect themselves. I'd like to see how smart meters can federate their digital certificates when moving from one supplier to another supplier in the future, because they've been bought on cost. So they might have a nice certificate built in firmware at manufacture, but then how are you going to transfer that certificate and the trust and the private keys for it from one supplier to the next when you have 6 competing big utility firms that would have to do it, because a federated model was never mandated right at the beginning.
You also mentioned earlier that, and Adam mentioned in his opening thing, that security is often seen as the people who say no. It used to be the IT department that said no. Now it seems to be. Is it the security people in the IT department who are saying no?
Anyone? Or me again?
I think it depends when you ask the question. So if you turn up at the end of your programme to say, well, we've been running it, we within the department have run an IT project to deliver a new digital first channel. Can you just sign here? And there's not been engagement with your security team in the department and whatever. Their first reaction is likely to be say no. I think it comes back to a comment that was made earlier: get involved early. So get the security team involved early, because increasingly, I think if things are built in at the time that you're developing a thing, actually increasingly, I think security functions can be content to say yes. We can say yes if we've got these enablers to allow us to manage the risk. So I think increasingly departments can do what they want to do, but engage with the security teams early.
Because we were talking about education, but obviously people, you think about in terms of security education, you're telling people to update their antivirus, etc., etc., etc. But do you think one of the major tenets of education should be, in terms of the software creation, is think about security before you start?
Yeah, have it as part of your project life cycle. Here's the point at which you engage security. Have it as part of the workflow where you can't avoid it.
I wondered if the panel were aware of any work that's gone into identifying sort of cost-benefit analysis of doing security, because all the questions and answers so far have been about, yes, security is good and should be done early, but there's different ways of doing security, and there needs to be a balance of how much money you throw at security versus how much of a risk there is to something happening, and then if something does happen, how much it will cost to recover from that risk.
So yeah, we have a process that we use. As long as the requirements are in early in the programme, we identify what we think the risks are. We go away and look at what possible mitigations you might have. Bearing in mind you've also got a legal framework, you've got safety, and you've got other bits and pieces pushing your design. So it's not just security, and then it's a trade-off between all of those things. So I think, yeah, as long as you do it early, you have the time to look at the different options you have, and you can choose an effective solution which is within your budget and mitigates the right risks, because you need to prioritise what you spend money on. If you do that later on down the line, it's a bit more difficult to do that.
For cyber, it's hard at the moment. Part of that is to do with breach reporting and the fact that there isn't that much information out there around what exactly what breaches have occurred and what were the impacts, to drive that sort of body of metrics to put it in the mainstream. So I think that will come, but I think it's fairly immature at the moment.
I'll give you an example. So IS1 won't mean anything to most boards, but Turnbull does in sort of in the private sector through a PLC. And so when I was doing my risk assessment, I aligned it with the Turnbull risks. So they understood monetary impacts, reputational impacts, and you were speaking to the board in the board's language. And cyber risks were added on the Turnbull risk register in adjacent to other business risks.
Yeah, we have a similar approach.
Gentleman at the back.
Thank you. I was interested in the panel's opinion on kind of sidestepping risk that a lot of organisations seem to take, where if you read the terms and conditions, it says that the organisation or software supplier or service supplier accepts no risk whatsoever. And the maximum, as I've seen in a few terms and conditions, the maximum amount of redress in any given situation is limited to $1 or £1. Or similar. And when you look at the proliferation of apps and the Internet of Things, and you talk about it being broken, is industry sidestepping risk and not building in cybersecurity because they can effectively opt out in the terms and conditions of any liability for needing to do so?
Depends on your business needs, doesn't it? So if integrity, availability and confidentiality of your business assets is important to you, then you probably want to build it in. But if they're not, then you might want to do less.
Limitation of liability in software licenses is probably an issue that we can't fix, but you should be negotiating liability and service contracts that may rely on software that you can't claim liability from the source vendor. So, for example, I was running data centers years ago, you go and buy some compact PCs and put Windows on it or whatever. They're not built for critical systems. All the liability exclusions say don't use this for anything that you want to rely on. But you still have to build something that's 5 nines available. So it's a balancing act. And if you can get a service supplier somewhere in your supply chain that will take a degree of liability for that, you can do that. Or if you can insure it with cyber insurance, you can do that. So it's balancing it. But certainly from software vendors, I think we're not going to extract too much in the way of liability, especially when apps are given away nigh on free. So why would they accept liability for more than £1?
Since it's a BCS thing, I wanted to link a chartered professional's obligations against, we were talking about cost-benefit analysis. There's a dilemma there. I know my product is insecure, or the things that I'm using are insecure. I see crime happening across the things that belong to my company. But the cost of dealing with it is of no benefit to the company, and I'm in a dilemma as a professional about what I should do, best practice, report fraud. That's a difficult area for us.
Code of ethics, BCS has one. Most of the security certifications that people in the room subscribe to have one. So ISC squared, ISACA, IISP, etc. And you have an obligation to raise those concerns to the business. And if the business refuses to acknowledge or address those concerns, they also probably have a whistleblowing policy as well. And you should still follow the normal chain of command as you might have for any other concern that you have within a business, be it fraud, misuse of company assets, security or privacy risks. Each company is different, their approach to it will be different, but you're absolutely right. If we're trying to call ourselves a profession, we should act professionally. The medical profession has the BMA. The BMA can strike medical professionals off. Does IT and cyber have that yet? So I think we're still maturing in that space. But you're absolutely right. Ethics is very important.
And then, of course, developing security, the sort of MOD side of things, a whole manner of other issues, I suppose.
Yeah, I echo what you say. I think, we are professionals and we should always promote the right behaviours and the right practices within security. It can be very difficult, particularly when you've got a large organisation to battle against and lots of board members, but there are ways, and putting risks into a format that they understand is a really good way of doing that. It's been very effective for us in the past.
One final question and then we'll have to wrap up, I'm afraid.
So what I would like to know is, this is a lovely discussion, and given the realities of cyberspace, you're only as safe as your partner. How do you deal with those of us across the ditch, and in fact with other places? I mean, it's all very well being shored up, but if the weakest link is the fear that we have, and how do you deal with the weakest link?
So I think industry as a whole are starting to work together a bit better. I think that's a really important step we have to take going forward. Because for us, we're interconnecting with a lot of different companies, products, etc. And we are relying on them doing the right thing as well. And therefore, those relationships going forward are really important, and we need to keep building on that.
Yeah, and I'd echo that. Say the supply chain as well as your information sharing partners and things are very important. Moving towards a degree of federated trust, I think, is an absolute necessity. How we do that with disparate technologies and policies is quite another matter.
For me, I think some of it comes down to actually one of the areas where government can help in terms of things like cyber essentials and having some common standards. And there probably needs to be more than one standard, if you like, depending on what. And I know in the defence sector there's talk about that in terms of depending on what sort of tier of data and activity you're undertaking will you'll have to potentially put in place controls at different levels and different levels of controls. And I think having that common framework will help interaction between organisations so that you can rely on that coordination.
I think I'd like to thank all the panel members. I think well done for staying this close to lunchtime. But if we could thank Richard, Gareth and Pearl, and thank you for your attendance. Thank you.